I hope you realize how ridiculous the four of you look. Spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat?
Senator, as a prosecutor, there are instances where there's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is...
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse just stunned a Senate hearing, directly confronting a panel of Trump-backed judicial nominees and raising a question that should shake confidence in the courts themselves. What followed wasn't just a tense exchange, it was a relentless takedown. But this wasn't just about one hearing, because as the questioning unfolded, it exposed something deeper, concerns that the judiciary is being shaped not just by legal philosophy, but by partisan alignment. Watch closely, because this is where the entire exchange takes a sharp and surprising turn.
Just to finish Senator Blumenthal's point, I hope you realize how ridiculous the four of you look. Spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. If you can't even sit here and say that Joe Biden won that election or that the Capitol was attacked, what's left? What's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision if the executive branch was leaning in on you when we can't get a reasonable answer out of any of you with the executive branch leaning in on you to give these ridiculous answers today? I'm really sorry to have to go through this and that you have to go through this. But it would be nice if you could tell your executive branch handlers, for instance, Ms. Clark, I'm supported by Lindsey Graham. He's a friend of President Trump. He's the second senior person on the Republican side in the Judiciary Committee. He's likely to be the next Judiciary Committee chair. I think I'll be okay. I don't need to make myself ridiculous at your direction. It'd be great if you could have said that. It would be great if your answers were simple and honest here today. It's really disappointing. Let me ask a different question, a legal question. A judge, you want to be judges. A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat? Ms. Clark?
There's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer
Correct.
your question, yes, I can imagine.
Do you agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit
Do you agree?
precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would agree with that.
I don't know that I care what you think, Ms. Westerkamp, because you're going to international trade and you're probably not going to see much of this, but do you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios would include doctrines like, name one, Ms. Clark.
Senator, doctrines that are, if someone is essentially carrying out
Solicitation, would that be
Yes.
one? Solicitation of a
Yes.
threat?
yes,
Or a conspiracy out of which the threat emerged, would that be another one?
Yes.
Yes. How about, and it's the product of an enterprise under the racketeering statutes. Would that also be another way that liability could extend beyond the utterer?
That is correct, Senator.
Can you think of any others, Ms. Lane, where liability extends beyond the utterer of the threat? What are some of the legal theories that would support that kind of investigation and prosecution?
Senator, the doctrines you mentioned, I would agree with, and I would just look always to the federal law and federal statutes guiding that.
Mr. Recchi?
Senator, I would agree with that. I think you covered the major ones: conspiracy, RICO. There may be other avenues of potential legal liability, but I think you covered the three big ones in that scenario.
Ms. Westerkamp, you agree?
Senator, I'm not aware if there are any more. With my practice before the Court of International Trade and Court of Federal Claims, it doesn't touch on criminal law.
So here's why I asked you these questions. I asked you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And in responding to those threats, we have the United States Marshal Service, which reports to the Department of Justice. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshal Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? That's a super easy question. The answer is, yeah, of course we will. They won't answer that. They won't answer that. And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshal Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that. And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. And this MAGA Department of Justice would rather not go there. And so they leave judges exposed with investigations in which they aren't doing investigative 101 work that you've all identified as plausible legal theories. And we need to fix that.
It begins with a moment that immediately sets the tone. Whitehouse doesn't hold back. He calls out the nominees, many of them selected by the Trump administration, for giving what he describes as preposterous and canned responses. Not to complex legal puzzles, but to basic, factual questions, like who won a presidential election, and whether they acknowledge the January 6th riots actually occurred. And when those answers don't come clearly, that's when the tension explodes. Because for Whitehouse, this isn't just hesitation, it's a signal. A signal that these nominees, despite seeking lifetime appointments, may be carefully executing political expectations tied to the administration that nominated them. And that raises a serious concern. If they can't speak plainly under oath in a Senate hearing, what happens when they're on the bench? When the pressure is real? When the stakes involve powerful political actors? When cases land directly in front of them involving the very administration that elevated them? Whitehouse pushes that idea further, suggesting that even in this moment, the nominees appear to be under subtle pressure, leaning toward answers that avoid contradicting the political base they're associated with. And that's where the issue shifts from uncomfortable to consequential. Because judicial independence isn't optional, it's the foundation of the entire system. But if nominees appear politically aligned, or worse, politically constrained, then public trust begins to crack. And that's exactly what Whitehouse is warning about. But just as the exchange reaches that boiling point, he pivots away from politics into law. He introduces a hypothetical situation. A judge receives a threat, not just any threat, but one targeting their life, their family. Then he asks, Can liability extend beyond the person who made the threat? This time, the nominees respond clearly, yes. Across the board, yes. They begin outlining legal doctrines, solicitation, conspiracy, racketeering, all standard legal tools that allow investigators to go beyond the surface, to look deeper, to follow the chain. And that contrast is impossible to ignore. Moments ago, hesitation. Now, confidence, precision, clarity. And that's when Whitehouse reveals why he asked. Because this isn't theoretical. Right now, he says, federal judges are facing an unprecedented wave of threats. And the responsibility to investigate those threats lies with federal authorities. But, according to Whitehouse, when asked a simple question, whether they would investigate beyond the individual making the threat, they refuse to answer, over and over again. And that silence raises a deeper concern. Because following those leads might uncover something politically inconvenient. Whitehouse points directly at it, suggesting that digging deeper into some of these threats could lead to right-wing networks or conspiracies that authorities are reluctant to confront. And if that's true, then the issue isn't just about threats. It's about selective enforcement. Because if investigations stop at the surface, then accountability stops with them. And the result? Judges left exposed. A system left vulnerable. And a public left wondering whether justice is truly blind or quietly influenced by politics. So what started as a confrontation over canned answers becomes something far bigger. A warning. About political alignment. About pressure. About what happens when those entrusted to interpret the law appear tied to the power that put them there. Now the bigger question is this. If judicial nominees seem unwilling to break from the politics behind their appointments, can their rulings be truly impartial and devoid of sentiments and political leanings? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns of the most intense moments from Washington's biggest political showdowns, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.